All right, everybody. I'm hoping that somebody can let us know in the chat if you can hear us. Welcome to our first collaborative live stream with Alien Girl 111 and Elephant in the Room. Our host from Alien Girl is NikkiStarChild. Everyone say hello to her. And our amazing co-host here on the Elephant in the Room podcast, Ariel Elizabeth.
Hey guys.
And we have three amazing guests tonight on the show. We're super excited about this. This has been a long time coming. And you guys, we really appreciate your time. And we know how important it is for people who are in this field to have a voice and a place to share their story when they're ready to do that. Not everybody's ready to do that, but when you are, we really just want to be a place where people can kind of explore their story with other people, because I think that's one of the ways that you learn and grow.
Yep.
So everybody, I'm going to just give a quick shout out, a very brief introduction to each of the girls, and then we're going to start with Leah after that. But to start out, we have LeahPrime, and Leah has been in the UFO Twitter community for quite some time now. I know I first was introduced to her on a Spaces a couple years ago, and honestly was just blown away by her intellect into the topic. It was just so inspiring for me to see somebody who really took the topic seriously and really did an integral view of the topic. And I really appreciate that about her. And she has like a big bio. I'll let her share that with you shortly. And then we have Curious Creature, who we like to call her Curious. And she is going to join us and talk a little bit about her experience, which she had 2.5 years ago. She's currently a student and she's majoring in poli-sci. So that's really awesome. And she actually has goals to pursue ridding the world of the social stigma of this topic. So we are really, really grateful that you're here on the show with us. And then finally, before we head off to Leah, I'm going to introduce Sydney. Sydney is an amazing friend I just met a couple of months ago. She's part of the Future Folklore Incubator, which I'm a part of with Joel. And Sydney is a founder, and she is a student at Yale University, and she's a senior in film and screenwriting, right? And Sydney is also an experiencer. She's actually had a very close encounter experience, which we'll be hearing about tonight. And she started the UFO Society at Yale, the first one ever. So that's super exciting. So we really have a lot to talk about. So we're going to just jump right in. And I'm going to go ahead and let Leah take the floor. And Leah, please introduce yourself and share with us how you ended up in this world.
Sure. So I wish I had the drawing that I drew in 3rd grade of the alien and the flying saucer, right? This is something my parents have held on to now for probably 30 years. For people that don't know me, I'm LeahPrime. I was the host of a show called The Invisible Night School. You'll find me on Twitter Spaces, commenting on Twitter. UFOs and ufology and high strangeness are basically the lifeblood of, I'd say, my intellectual background. I grew up listening to Art Bell. In my side spare time, when I'm not like chasing down clients or doing data science or whatever, I'm actually researching and working on a study of Coast to Coast AM and Art Bell and sort of the frontier knowledge associated with his show in the 90s and early aughts. And when I was asked to join this panel, first of all, super excited, for partly because I love connecting with other women in this subject, and partly because I think there needs to be more kind of cross dialogue around the experience and how we understand and contextualize these things, especially against this backdrop of like hyper materialistic interpretations of reality and human experience. Because anyone who's heard me speak on this subject probably has heard me talk a lot about the limitations of how we understand and frame reality, and the limitations of our scientific modeling and instrumentation, and how we assess like truth or reality. And this subject has compelled me for a very long time. I come at the experience or phenomena largely from the direction of spiritual emergence, in the sense that these are experiences that humans have been having throughout all of recorded history, across all cultures, all theologies, all backgrounds, philosophies, ages, genders, sexes, whatever. And that what we see now in our modern moment basically is a lack of narrative to understand and metabolize these experiences. And I think that in turn, people who have experiences, and before the show we were talking about whether I consider myself in that group, and I think in the like sort of very broad sense, I would consider myself an experiencer as someone who's gone through spiritual emergence and A&P experiences. Like these experiences, if there are not containers either socially or culturally to hold them, can pretty quickly become deeply traumatic and deeply destabilizing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the reason I'm so interested in these community spaces and these conversations, because we are inherently meaning making and sense making and community seeking creatures, and to connect and hear and hold space for both our own experiences and others' experiences, I think that there's immense power in that kind of solidarity, but
Yeah.
also it helps us, I think, gain insight into what we encounter and what we see, either when it's like what we would call like an abductee experience, or like I come from like a Buddhist tradition, so like what you experience when you're in a jhana state, or like what you experience when you're practicing fire kasina. And I think we're also in a situation where we can kind of learn and leverage the experiences of others to help add color to like what we ourselves encounter. So that's a little bit about me. I think maybe the other salient stuff is just I'm highly interdisciplinary. Like I work in tech. I always say I like work in tech for money, but I live a vibes-based life, right? Like everything is based in my life on like intuition and vibes. And so I'm just delighted for the opportunity this evening to share some time with the other women in this space.
Oh, Krys, you're muted. Krys.
Thank you so much. See, I'm really bad about multitasking here. So that was an amazing introduction. And you really just, wow, you nailed the whole idea and concept of experiencers and how there are so many different, there's no framework or narrative for that. And I hope that we can, start that dialogue. And I mean, other people have obviously started the dialogue way before us. We're just, coming in after, but we want to continue the dialogue. And thank you so much, Leah.
Could I ask a quick follow-up question, Krys?
Of course.
So just let me have like my quick fangirl moment, Leah. Oh, so good to meet you.
I've had crushes on like everyone on the stream. So
I know. I like, and you always just have this way of taking an idea and like consolidating it and just saying it so succinctly. Whereas I'm like, that was in my head, but then you like put it out there in such a succinct way. So I love that about you.
Thank you.
And that's a talent. That is an honest talent, because for me, it takes like paragraphs to say what I want to say. But so when you say that you've been kind of into this as a child, is that where you like your journey started, or did your journey with it kind of begin more as an adult? Like how long have you been on this journey?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? It's the work of a lifetime. And I'm not sure I would have always phrased it that way, but I would characterize myself as a lifelong seeker in any sense of the word, whether it's concrete knowledge, formal education, experience, etc. I always had an intellectual fascination with like the occult and esoteric, starting from a very, very young age. Anyone who knows my backstory knows I was raised almost Orthodox Jewish, like no TV, no movies, no nothing. So I grew up in a very book heavy and for me, radio heavy childhood and household. When I was I'd say when I was 15 or 16, I started reading Philip K. Dick and Robert Anton Wilson, which really like kind of, I'm of an age before like the internet was like as much of a thing, I guess. And so that was kind of my introduction to like fringe style thinking without dipping like fully into like crystal shop woo.
Right.
And I was very interested in this, but I understood it intellectually, right? Through this like academic framework, like how many books could I read, or like, things could I watch on the internet? In 2015 or 16, I read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time. And this was like a profoundly transformative experience for me. And it also connects deeply with like my first experience with psychedelics in 2015, in my late 20s. And and sort of culminated in understanding the occult and esoteric, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a participatory practice. And that started probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And I kind of did the standard model, like, you know, bougie white lady woo-woo trip, like yoga, meditation, the self-realization fellowship, transcendental meditation, thelema, theosophy, like I did all that stuff. And finally, you know, landed kind of in this perennialist space of like, there's a lot of paths up the mountain, right? Western, Eastern, all these different traditions, many different paths up the mountain. And also this idea that we live in a moment and in an environment that very deliberately obfuscates our ability to hear these more subtle energies or voices or ideas around us. And this is by design, right? Like we're deliberately overstimulated to not hear these things. And I say all that to say that it has been a lifelong transition from a what we would call like prepositional knowledge, like book reading, to like participatory knowledge and experience. And what that looks like now for me is very serious meditation practice, breath work, exploration of mystical traditions, of Jung, of contemporary experiences of spiritual emergence or awakening or non-duality or mystical emergence that people have. And it was very clear to me when I started being more open about this subject and connecting with other people in and around it, that like, again, this kind of perennialist idea was coming up. It felt like a lot of people were talking about the same things, whether it's in Buddhism or Vedanta or Theosophy or UFO Twitter. But they were using very different language to talk about these kind of ineffable experiences, which makes sense because ineffability means it's very difficult to wrap language around non-duality or awakening or anything like that. I know that's a super long-winded answer, but that's sort of like the chronology of events here to get me to where I am now.
Amazing. I love it. All right, back to you, Krys.
Okay, no, that was a great answer. All right, so let's head on over to Curious. If we want to go to you, hear a little bit about your story, and then we'll dialogue in. I do have queued up the video, so whenever you want me to show that, that's fine. And I could probably pull up the pictures too, but that could be a little clunky. So
maybe later we can pull up the pictures and everything.
Yeah, okay.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
well, hi everyone. I go by Curious, obviously, and I'm originally from Virginia Beach, Virginia, but I'm now living in Texas, and I've been here for the past 3 years now. I've got family here, but I'm a political science major and student, and I'm also a songwriter on top of that. So that's kind of where my heart is. If you need a jingle, let me know. But singer-songwriter, and my family have had UFO sightings for the past 2.5 years now. And we've had over 25 interactions with the phenomenon, and they're kind of ongoing. I kind of fell upon ufology and started my research back in 2021. And that was during quarantine. I was taking a break, and in between schools, I was transferring at the time to a different school here in Texas. And that's when I had a deep dive and really cannonballed into ufology. And I became kind of associated, or, you know, I learned about the Nimitz encounter and Lou Elizondo and Jacques Vallée and the whole 9 yards. And that's where I also found Stephen Greer and his efforts at SETI in the 80s and 90s, where he kind of cavaliered CE5 meditation, or close encounters of the first through fifth kind. And that's when I found out that you could meditate to attempt to contact these phenomena. And kind of 7 months after my research in 2021 is when my family had our first sighting. And our first sighting was actually the night we moved here in South Texas. So it was a kind of a strange synchronicity that the night we moved here, we had an orb fly over our car. And after my research, I kind of knew, the phenomenon was real and that it existed, and that was confirmation for me. And after we had that first sighting, we started practicing CE5 meditation regularly, and we've had successful kind of contact with UAP, and we see them on a regular basis. And, since then, our encounters are ongoing. And just briefly, we've seen physical craft. So we've seen triangles, chrome spheres. My mom saw one that kind of folded into like a bird in an origami style. And we've seen what I call shadow apparitions. We've seen orbs of all colors and kinds. And if we want to get into the woo a little bit later, I've had some weird dreams of abductions and probing and stuff like that, of that sort. So it's been weird. And so we're definitely aware of the phenomenon, and for some reason, somehow it's aware of us, and we have this just extremely sensitive kind of tether to it. I don't know what it is, and we all have different kind of perceptions of what it might be. But yeah, they just show up to us all the time. And so I'm kind of approaching this conversation as an experiencer primarily. I am a poli-sci student, so I do want to kind of focus on and just highlight the legislative efforts in UAP disclosure overall. And I think connecting with other experiencers and not only being advocates for our personal stories, but advocates for, you know, political change and long-term efforts to help future experiencers is something that's really important from kind of my mindset. And yeah, I want to find the truth. I hope the government and academia take us a bit more seriously. And obviously we're seeing with the Seoul conference that shift is kind of happening. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I hope I wasn't too long-winded. But I know I'm someone who definitely needs like pointed questions, because I might black out of nervousness and forget to offer up information. So please I'm an open book if you have any questions. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really, I mean, I think yeah, looking back at like how I met you online through Twitter, your story resonates so much with mine. I mean, the timing, the flow, I started kind of digging into it right before. So I really relate to your story. One thing I didn't really, and I sort of kind of, I guess, meditated slightly before, but I really didn't know what I was doing. But I kind of had heard if you meditate, if you think happy thoughts, you might, get these things. And then it happened. So then what was that like, because now you're practicing it. So like, was it scary for you? I mean, maybe we're kind of getting into that a little bit early, but I'm just curious what your feeling was when you had the experiences.
Sure. So, as I said, I had been doing research prior to having our sighting. And so that sighting we had when we moved here, it was the night we got here. We were driving along the highway, and an orb flew over our car, and I was driving, and my mom was there with me. And that was kind of confirmation for me that something that something else exists, and it's here, and it wants to be seen for one reason or another. And after that, I kind of felt more comfortable towards the idea of CE5 meditation, because I'd heard about it. I'd heard that people had had success with it. And it was a notion that kind of made me nervous, but I think my curiosity just kind of overtook me, honestly. And so my sister and we didn't really know exactly what we were doing CE5 meditation. There is a protocol, but the app was, it cost money, so I didn't want to spend any money on it. So we kind of just winged it, and we kind of made up our own protocol. And it was, kind of scary in the moment, but we didn't approach it with fear for some reason. I think that may contribute to our kind of positive perspective or outlook on this thing. But yeah, we had our first CE5 meditation, and it was just my sister and I, my twin sister. And we saw a triangle the first time we meditated that flew over our home at like 5 miles per hour. And after that night, when we saw the triangle, it kind of felt like a spiritual experience in a sense. It really kind of, I felt a wave of calm, for me at least. I don't approach these with like a spiritual kind of thought process, but I don't know, there was calm. And like after that experience, that kind of informed us that it was kind of okay to keep going. That might be naive to think, but we haven't had any outright negative experiences. So I kind of let that experience and our, survival instincts and our physical reaction inform how we approached meditation.
I have a question that I always really like to ask people around their experiences is how have these experiences changed your views about the world, or changed like your ontologies?
Right. So it's endless. I actually have a few notes here because there's just so much.
Cool.
But I kind of wrote here, like, it changed me personally, and it forces personal growth. I know just interacting with the phenomenon, either by happenstance or if you intentionally kind of meditate, it requires a really strong kind of fortified mind and sense of self, and kind of approaching fear and understanding that there is this omnipresent kind of presence around us at all times that we may not interface with, obviously, and in outright or visible ways. But it's kind of changed my perspective on religion and things like that, I kind of turned to look into Buddhism towards like those notions of meditation. And that's what really kind of aligned most with our experiences, which I find to be pretty interesting. I come from a really religious background and grew up Southern Baptist. And so just coming from like a religious standpoint, it made me question even like who we are, what religion is. And I've also kind of looked at Diana Pasolka's and her book actually about encounters and just her study with in academia about religion and how it also kind of points to the phenomenon throughout history. And it's made me kind of question, I don't know, just the way we navigate the world. And as humans, I think we're not as aware of, we're not led to believe how powerful our conscious and our minds are. So I think there's a lot to uncover and discover there. Sorry if that was kind of winded.
No, it was beautiful, and like nobody here should be apologizing for how much they talk or what their insights are. Like, let me be clear. Like, this is like all of us have something super valuable to say and come with different experiences and backgrounds. And I think part of the power of having a women's panel, right, is like not silencing or not being silenced. So
Love that. Love that. I think that's so incredibly insightful how you approach it, and just like adopted it like within your reality with just looking at the intentions behind it and trying to. And I mentioned this to Ariel before, maybe it is naivety, right? We're just like, if it doesn't feel bad, so maybe it's okay. But I don't know how else to judge the world, besides on our intuition and our feelings and our intellect. So I really love that story. Thank you for sharing. All right, Sydney, are you ready?
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really humbling to be with, such strong women as, I'm still in college. And gosh, I just resonate so much with everything that's being said. I just want to shout out that I too have like delved into looking into the occult, like after having these experiences, taking it more seriously, just particularly the practice of magic in like a positive sense. Because the way my experiences unfolded just kind of felt like, I don't know, magic, just because it was weird. Like I had started researching UFOs and, like the concept of aliens because my best friend had seen UFOs basically her whole life. And then I was with her at a park and we saw my first UFO. So it all just felt like very lined up in my mind. And I've heard people say that sometimes you have these sightings when you're in a state of like flow or like calm. And that was certainly the case. It's like I could sense that it was about to happen. Like there was like almost magic in the air. And then, like we were walking and we both just turned around at the same time and we happened to see the UFO and it was like behind us. And so there is like this element of like ESP, like being able to know that something strange is about to happen. And then we saw like an 8-foot tall humanoid creature right after that. And it was very corporeal. It wasn't like a ghost or anything. And I'm curious about, curious is a comment about shadow apparitions because this one was completely pitch black and kind of was like something we might call a shadow person, but we could hear it like stepping in the leaves and everything. So it was completely solid. Like it wasn't, like just mist or anything. But since then, gosh, it's just like, I mean, I say this a lot. I feel like my life has become like a video game in a way, or like a movie, because it just gives you this like burst of energy to figure out what's going on and, share the story. And it just makes life so interesting. So like, even though, we got very negative vibes from the creature that we saw, that could have been our own projection. However, it seemed to, we felt it was very negative. And so it was pretty traumatic. Like, I'm to this day, I'm scared of the dark and, have like complex PTSD basically. And so it's just, something that stays with you. And I'm interested in, like, because it has been said already in this podcast, a lot of people do just apply this love and light aura to these encounters. And to me, it's almost like I kind of thrive on questioning, like, well, where are human rights when it comes down to it? Like, how can they just appear in our airspace and in our towns? And because this was right in the center of a city, it was a city park. So I'm just like, how can they be here and they're allowed to be here? It just seems like an affront, but a very cool affront. However, I do tend to see it with a lot of like skepticism. But yeah.
I think that's really important, and I think that we do need to look at the negative aspects or the I mean, there are people who have lived with this for many, many years and have been very traumatized and have been dismissed and stigmatized. And sometimes I think the stigma is worse than the actual experience itself, right? So what would you say to people who are struggling with that idea of negative versus positive? Like, how do you reconcile that?
Oh, well, I think you just have to go case by case. I think about it like there's not just good humans and bad humans. It's like a big mix of us, like our species as a whole is very diverse in our ethical relations with other beings. So we just need to look, I would say, at it from an open-minded perspective and say that most likely there's a big array of non-human intelligence that are good, and then some are bad and some are in between. But I think we should have a little bit more of a backbone and not be too naive about it, because I do see it through the lens of kind of like indigenous people and colonizers. Like, if these are from another dimension or another planet, they are kind of invading us. So we shouldn't just think that just because they have better technology than us, that they're necessarily wise and they have like benevolent intentions that we can't understand. We should be a little bit more sober about it. It's just how I see it.
That's fair. Do you guys have any other questions for her right now on her particular story? And then I think we should delve into just go ahead. Yes, Nikki, please go.
Yeah, Sydney. So, well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing everything and starting the UFO Society at Yale University. That's huge. Super exciting to see someone who's as eloquently spoken as you to come forward and talk about this. I wanted to know, I was just kind of blown away with your statement. I wanted to know if you knew about Adrian Reister, who he was a man who used to be a United States Air Force nuclear weapons technician. And he saw glowing orbs hovering over his security base. And he also came face to face with a shadow person.
Wow.
Have you heard of this? It sounds very similar to what you're talking about, the patterning and the like. That's, he came on our show and he talked about it. And he could hear, like you were saying, like the noises. He was talking about what the noises sounded like with this being moving. So this kind of shook me a little bit that you brought that up. So I was wondering if you'd heard of that incident.
It sounds familiar to me, but I've never heard the name, so probably not. Like, just the concept of, shadow people on military bases, I have heard in the past, but that's a very good lead.
Because he said the bodies were they were bodies. It was not a shadow in the same way that you explain it.
Oh, wow.
He said it was almost like they were wearing a wetsuit, or it was like, I don't know, like a multidimensional fabric, something along those lines. Anyway, I just thought it was really interesting that you brought up the physical aspect as well. And thank you so much for sharing. That stuff is so hard to do. And it's so important that people like you come forward, and especially with a skeptical eye, to be like, I don't know what I saw, but like, that was wild, right? Like, that is huge. And it's such a breath of fresh air to have somebody say, I saw something wild, and I'd have like, that's kind of wild to me, right? Sometimes you'll get like, I saw this, and then they talked to me and I got on the flight. And so it's really cool to see you say, I don't know what I saw, but that was fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And it's really great you're doing all these things.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Curious, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I did want to kind of respond about the shadow apparitions. My sister and I, we just call them shadow apparitions. They were kind of figures that fly, or at least when we saw them, they were like flying figures that came, from east to west, and they flew down like at ground level. And when we see those kind of shadow, like wispy formations, we do kind of get those feelings of fear, and they don't feel kind of welcoming, and they make us feel unsettled, and heart race, adrenaline just goes crazy. So it's only with those that we have that kind of fear. So it's a strange kind of through line there that kind of we have the same emotions approaching those. But yeah, I don't know what they are, but they're definitely they pique some sort of fear in our bodies for sure.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, you don't really have control over the fear. It's like this animal thing. Like
Right.
we said to each other, like we felt for the first time in our lives that we were prey being stalked by something more intelligent than us, or at least as intelligent as us,
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting to compare it to, I compare my sightings, even though they're not scary or whatever. I don't really feel like I'm doing CE5 when I see them, but it's like I look for them, and it's like I'm like there, and I anticipate, but that may show up or may not show up, like wildlife, like like a bird, it might show up and I'm going to have this great experience seeing it, or it may not. So I really didn't like continue to practice that type of, per se, welcoming of it in. Sydney, as far as you would say, is that something you would ever consider, or is this something you're like, no way?
I've thought about it, and I've had a friend say we should go back to that park and try to summon it again, and I was like, sure, but then I was like, wait, no, I'm too scared.
No
So I
way.
backed out of it. Because it was a Native American heritage site is the other thing. It had a circle of stones, and we saw the creature right when we got to the center of the stones. So it felt like kind of, an interface that could be activated again if I wanted to. But yeah, I would have to get a game plan if I did it again.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Wow.
Yeah, y'all know I ain't ever doing CE5. Nope. I get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, and I will not look out the window. I will not.
So
No.
so I have a comment here. This is not me badgering. I'm really interested. So I've been reading like Rick Rubin's The Creative Act lately, which if anyone's read that, it's basically his like meditations on creativity. And I've also been working through The Artist's Way, which is like basically like a 12-week boot camp for like creative type A's.
Oh my God.
And I bring this up because one of the things I keep thinking about is how much creativity and art, or like the creative act, or this like desire, the libidinal drive to create, I guess, feels to me like similar to or adjacent or overlapping with like experiences, especially when we talk about things like downloads, or like these kinds of like bursts of creative inspiration. And I think the other thing is like how you create or induce these creative experiences or downloads is so similar to CE5, right? Like you create these like open and spacious environments, you meditate, you relax, you do repetitive tasks that allow kind of your mind to drift or tune out.
Yeah.
And like I bring this up just because I'm like so interested in how creativity overlaps with like the mystical or the expansive experience. And to me, it relates very directly to CE5 too, or Heis, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could either one of you guys talk on that? How has your creativity shifted, if at all? Curious.
Sure. I know as a singer-songwriter, I usually express myself through like my words and through music. But after starting, or this was prior to CE5, it's funny that you mentioned the creativity aspect. I did send in a painting that I painted. I don't know, it's the flame kind of figure, But this was during my research into ufology. I, for some reason, got this, I guess, download, you would call it, as you mentioned, Leah. It kind of felt like a download where I painted this image one day, and I don't know where it came from. It just turned into like this portrait. And then in the background, I drew these kind of orbs flying in a formation. And it's interesting because almost a year later, I ended up seeing that formation when my mom, sister, and I were sitting outside. And it was exact. Like I painted it. It was orbs in like a horseshoe formation. And then later, I think it was, I don't remember the dates on here, but we saw an exact, we saw orbs about 80 in a horseshoe formation flying very fast above our home. And so I don't know if that was like a precognitive kind of moment, but that's what I painted. And again, this was during like 2021. And then we saw the fleet of orbs in 2022 in November. So a little over a year later. And again, I don't know how that relates to creativity, but it also does feel like that kind of download situation happens when you do something like that. Because I don't know where that drawing came from. It just like came on the page and then we ended up seeing it. So it was a weird kind of synchronicity and it felt purposeful, like in hindsight.
Amazing.
Yeah. Sydney, what about you? Any shift in your creativity or like you guys talked about this energy?
I mean, there is the aspect where I do feel more energized on the day to day. I mean, completely. It's like kind of given me the will to like fight, to just engage in this crazy world that was a lot stranger than I thought it was. But then more practically, in my screenwriting, I just feel like it's a gold mine, like telling NHI stories is just an endless field of opportunity. There's not a lot of people doing it. I mean, we have like a couple good movies every few years, but we could go a lot further with it. And it brings me so much joy to work in that area. So it has helped me a lot. And, they say like your enemies make you who you are. So like, even if these entities are negative, like hats off to them, they have given us some good stories. So yeah.
I think that's really true. I think that what you do with the experience is really what it's about. I like, there's just something that in the end, it tells me it's really about the process. It comes down to that. And I mean, maybe that's just me making it up because, I think maybe we'll never figure out what the actual outcome is. So living by the process and seeing how it transforms people's lives, I think is really going to be what takes this topic to the next level. Coming into this topic as females, which I know it's kind of funny because we are all here. We're a panel of amazing, beautiful, smart women. And there's sometimes controversy about announcing this as an all-female panel. So I'm going to bring in the controversy because I think I'm curious to know what experiences do you think females have in this field that is different, because I would love.
Well,
let's go, Leah. Let's go.
Yes, bring it.
Because I think we should share that with our viewers. I think they should know.
Yeah. Oh, but I'm happy to take this one. So, I want to preface this by saying I've spent my whole life in male-dominated environments. I work in tech. I was in ROTC in college. I went to an engineering school. I'm used to being the only woman in the room, right? That's a very common experience for me. I think that there are very serious problems systemically with misogyny in and around this subject. And I think a lot of that stems from the same kind of misogyny you see in and around a lot of male-dominated spaces populated by, frankly, men that are either confronting or dealing with or working through some kind of trauma or wounding, whether it relates to their UAP, UFO experiences or like other forms of trauma and grief in their lives. My experience in and around this space, as anyone who kind of knows about me knows that I have been doxxed, harassed, stalked, not left alone, slandered, libeled, have had to involve legal authorities and the police, basically just in response to not wanting to talk to some men, not wanting to get involved with men in and around this community. I think that this is also like, this goes back to what I was saying before, where I think this subject inherent, like, by its very nature, is so deeply personal and touches something very deep inside the people interested in it, that like it can even the slightest push can trigger a huge amount of wounding and reaction from experiencers. And I think that, combined with like there being some kind of taboo or stigma around this subject, combined with also, frankly, like the emotional pain and suffering that I think a lot of men experience regularly, makes for something of a tenuous and frankly kind of unstable environment for a lot of women. And that's why, like, a big reason I stepped back from my own show was treatment of men in the community, and also why I was so excited to talk to other women, because like I found incredible camaraderie and support from other women in and around this space, and I found the whisper networks of women to be very helpful in knowing kind of how to navigate and who to talk to as well. So, I mean, that's sort of my answer. I certainly do not speak on behalf of the entire panel. This is just like my own experience in and around the subject. And, you know, very candidly, like I take a huge amount of pride in being like very open to all of everyone's experiences and backgrounds, whether men, woman, trans, gay, whatever. But like I have generally been pretty disappointed in a lot of the behaviors of men in and around the topic.
One thing that I've noticed is, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, Leah, is I have found a lot of men feel very sure about their interpretation of the phenomenon, what they believe the phenomenon to be. And if you just even just slightly poke at that or say, maybe it's something else, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, they lose it on you because they feel they have it all figured out.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean I think that's that's a like a fragility of experience kind of thing. You know, like when you encounter something that does not fit neatly into how we understand and interpret the world, like this is a traumatizing experience. Like there's a reason people talk about mystical experiences as being traumatizing, or dissociative, or like depersonalizing. And I think people, not certainly not just men, but I think people in and around this subject, like you mentioned, are very quick to assign causal relationships to what they've experienced. And to push back on that is seen as like a personal attack in a lot of respects, even if it's not personal at all, even if it's just like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? This may be something worth exploring. I think the subject is so personal and so tenderly held by a lot of people that like any pushback is perceived as a direct and personal threat.
Yep. Amy, do you have anything?
When it comes to this conversation, because there's a huge difference. I'm making a poll right now for the chat because I've been listening and thinking while Leah was talking. And it's kind of like, why aren't there more women in ufology? So we asked the chat and they're saying, well, women aren't interested. A lot of these guys in the chat are saying that there's no ladies they know who are interested in this. And so that's interesting to me. I think it's just because maybe they're not used to seeing women talk about it too much. But there's another level of it for me. And I think it's that I don't want to be part of any deep project, right? Like someone's like, come check out this rabbit hole. I mean, nah, go for it, guys. Knock yourself out. That's why, the ones who are talking about the super secret dark stuff, it gets really weird and creepy. And you're like, who are you talking to? Who's tracking this conversation?
All the super soldier fantasies.
Yeah, and so, I mean, yeah, I think that's why, sometimes, but I don't know. Maybe it's the same for a lot of different fields, but I know for me, that's what I think it is like safety, and we don't get that just with women. We get that with people who were in the military that are there telling everybody they've seen alien biologics or not seen them, but they've heard alien biologics exist and flying saucers are real. Right. And so it's just kind of like interesting because every single person who talks about this topic gets ridiculed. It's everyone's secret little whatever. And people will laugh it off. So when you get into and then you take that energy and you walk it into an arena that's like 15-20% females and then like 80% males. It's very dynamic, right? And I've learned a lot of stuff along the way. But yeah, I think it's a good thing, and having panels like this and more women talking is good. I think it also brings more balance to like a natural big narrative that's kind of going on the internet. Like I see people kind of like leveling out. Like I feel like it just used to be like, "What's up, bro?" And then they'd be like, "Bro, yeah, bro, you think you're bro? You don't even know, bro." And the next thing you know, we're all like, "What?" Like people don't think it, but like they act different. Okay, just like you would tell any middle school girls, the boys act a little different. Because they do. They just have the egos and they like to mess around and they're trying to impress the chicks. I mean, that starts. Don't get me started, but I'm going on gender stereotypes. I tend to just talk really generalized, because obviously I do think it comes down to, divine masculine, divine feminine, non-binary, and so I do try to take all of those things into account as well, right? Because as we all move forward, because the other component of it, and I'll shut up after this, but you asked me what I thought. The other component of this is that when we talk about these things, the next thing, and we talked about this on the last show when I was on your girls' show last time, which is transhumanism, which is the next step, right? Like, so we're concerned and being like, should people be doing that to their bodies? Well, they finally put the first Neuralink chip in somebody's brain last week. And he like woke up according to Elon's tweet. He's good, right? Like, that's what we know. But, so I mean, I think the next level is God, like we could have robots that have babies. Like that's possible. It's not like out of the realm. We could do that. Like, why not? Get on it.
Well,
Make it happen, somebody.
yeah, I mean that's been sort of like a modernist idea, right? That like humans ultimately co-evolve and inextricably evolve alongside and with technology.
Mhm.
Right? Like that's that's an idea that Heidegger's talked a lot about, and like is a pretty common idea. I mean, that like our use of tools and our ability to offload information to our environment sort of is what separates humans from like most of the animal kingdom. And our ability to incorporate technology and like use it in lieu of like evolutionary disadvantages, like that feels like ultimately what we converge on. I mean, assuming the glaciers don't melt and drown us all first or whatever.
That's the other question of if,
Krys, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This
Am
is
I
like being
talking?
on a Zoom
No,
call at
you're not
work.
talking over.
Just non-human technology potentially helping us solve like global warming issues.
Yeah.
That's the hope I'm holding on to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that it's interesting because I can see your point where you say, what are our rights if we belong here, they're showing up in our domain. I'm not sure I feel that they're from somewhere else. So that for me, it's almost like, are we on their domain is part of the question. And are we screwing with some of the stuff on their domain? But that ties back into this whole concept of what technology do they have, whether they're from somewhere else or from here. We have access to that potentially, according to what everything we know so far, if you're not ignoring all the signs. And humanity is being kept from that knowledge and that information. And that's where my passion is just what could we be doing with the knowledge and information we have from this reverse technology could to help humanity. I mean, I'm concerned that it's more of an arms race, and that's what they're what they want it for, and what they're hiding it for, and I think that, like, for me, that's a terrible idea. But how do we have our voices as advocates in this topic and really make, whether it's like you said, Sydney, from your perspective, hey, what are they doing here? What are they doing hurting our people and touching our people and showing up? Or have they brought something and we have access to it and our own people are keeping it from us? So what are your guys' thoughts on that? Anyone?
Sure. I mean, and that's kind of what kept me within the community and within ufology and kind of reaching out more to people and doing more research is the fact that you hear all about this reverse technology that apparently we were kind of reverse engineering in the 80s and back in the 90s, and that humans may have the capacity to remake this technology, as we talked about, and potentially end global warming and end just this environmental pollution that's been going on using fossil fuels. And I think the notion that if this is something that could potentially kind of get us into free energy, I think the more disclosure, we should advocate more for disclosure, frankly. And I think, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot. I'm kind of blanking right now, sorry. But I feel like we're missing out on a lot of opportunities. And I think just for the betterment of humanity and for our future, I think it's going to require a massive shift at the federal level and executive level when it comes to kind of merging the private industry and kind of the, war industry and getting this kind of technology integrated. And hopefully one day we can kind of utilize it for free energy and just reverse this world that we've built for ourselves when it comes to those kind of technologies.
Do you think that they could be holding some of this reverse tech back because if it could just be like humans aren't capable of evolving that quickly. So like trying to integrate technology that's just so beyond, if they just give that to us and we try to integrate that into society, I mean, it could just be too much. It could be too much all at once, and it needs to maybe happen slowly.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And it seems like that's maybe even the reason why it's been withheld for so long and why it is so compartmentalized, because maybe there's a reason for us not to kind of obtain that energy. And I don't even know, again, if we even have the capability to create kind of 0 point energy in our physical tech here and with these materials and everything. But yeah, maybe there is a reason that we don't have it and we aren't using it. So I don't know. I don't know if it's for the betterment or for worse that we're not kind of disclosing it. But I think it should be disclosed that there is, that this technology does exist for, academic research and for scientists around the globe to even just begin to look into it and kind of discover what they are and what it is and kind of what it means for our technology, really.
Yeah. Did you guys see the coverage or the clip of Hal Puthoff at the Seoul conference talking about disclosure? And I mean, it sounds like he basically said he was invited to participate in a roundtable discussion, a classified roundtable discussion, and talk about disclosure. And they essentially put a stop to it. And this was, I don't know how many years ago. They said it was too much to disclose, to handle, essentially, right? Wow. How do you guys feel about that? I mean, I think like looking at it, I guess my take for me is that who are these people that get to decide on behalf of humanity that it is or isn't something that we need to have? Like, I understand somebody has to be that person. It's just that we don't know who those people are because it's not clearly our Congress or our government that's actively in charge. So what are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I feel like it's a class issue. If the non-human intelligences are from Earth, or some of them are from Earth, then they're not necessarily invaders or colonizers. They're just like high-class people by nature of their technology who are manipulating lower-class people. And because, wisdom, knowledge, access to information and technology puts you at a higher class. So it's just a huge problem, the same type of problem we've seen throughout history. Luckily, I have a lot of hope that, people can reclaim some of that transparency for like the sake of democracy. Luckily, our Congress does have a lot of power compared to other, governments throughout history and currently. So, I think we could get on the right track. Yeah, but that's how I see it.
That's fair.
Leah, what do you think?
Oh boy. One of the subjects of conversation frequently in the Prime household between me and beloved Mr. Prime, is basically like, what would constitute evidence or substantial enough proof for the average person to actually believe that there is a non-human entity living with us on this fucking planet? Pardon my French. And I bring this up because, like, look, like, we pretty categorically have a population in the United States where half of the people here basically don't even believe in germ theory. So, like, if the classical standards of empirical science, I'm not talking about paranormal stuff. I'm not talking about esoteric stuff. I am talking about, like,
nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I'm talking about, like, very basic transactional linear medication and, like, medical intervention. Sorry, I know that's a hot button subject, but my point is that, like, given that, like, the gold standards of evidence are pretty categorically dismissed, denigrated, or undermined, or institutionally not supported in this country, like, what would actually be the threshold of evidence for anything? I don't just mean non-human intelligence, I mean anything.
To believe
where
anything.
where you could basically have it enter into the consensus reality. And like, the very cynical part of me thinks that a lot of the reason this subject has been picked up and appropriated by a lot of politicians is because it adds fuel to the fire to undermine institutional credibility, right? Like, there's lots of good reasons to not trust and believe the government, right? Like, look at history, look at the Tuskegee experiment, look at, like, crack in LA in the 80s. There's all sorts of good reasons. But like, this is a great wedge topic to help basically dismantle and obviate, like shared reality or truth or facts or whatever. And that's what I keep coming back to, is like, what kind of standard of evidence? Would it have to be major research universities issuing a joint statement? Well, we live in such an anti-intellectual, anti-academic culture. Like, if somebody from Yale or Berkeley or Stanford or MIT came out and said all this stuff, would people actually believe it, or would they dismiss it as just more coastal elitism? So that's, like, what I keep coming back to, is that, like, the standards of evidence probably wouldn't be compelling enough to convince the plurality of the population anyway, regardless of what they were.
I agree.
100% agree. This is something that we talk a lot about. And I mean, for me, I think the only way it's going to be fully integrated into the consensus is the aliens are just walking down the street everywhere, and we're just like, hey guys, and they're like, hey guys, and I mean that's going to be the only way.
People dunked on that Scorsese Super Bowl commercial, but, like, I don't know, we're all walking around like this 23 hours a day, like, we're like some, like, ridiculous Magritte painting staring at screens. And, like, what does it actually take, right? And, like, how do you basically untangle this knot that we're already in from, like, an epistemological perspective around, like, how we create and understand and validate truth in a way that most of us agree with or understand in, like, a consensual or consensus fashion.
Right. There is no shared framework anymore, really.
Exactly.
There's just not. Wow, that really is fascinating. I know I say that a lot, but I'm just, like, blown away by you guys and your thought processes and how you think through this topic. It's just really incredible. And knowing that, like, historically you've had this topic, it's been stigmatized, and it has been at the top of the media's hit list for making look crazy. And it is interesting, why are these politicians starting to come in and start, like, picking it up? And it's we would love to think it's for our benefit of transparency, but in reality, if you look frankly at even Burchett or whatever, they're using it to talk about how the government's not doing its job. So I think that's really insightful, Leah.
What I will say, and, like, again, like, this is me being very much biased and colored by my background in meditation, spiritual emergence, psychedelic practices, transpersonal practices, is that I think that we're seeing a really interesting co-emergence of three things. We're seeing a UFO flap, or, like, popular interest in ufology and UAPs. We're seeing the psychedelic renaissance, right? Yep. Which is largely like, nonpartisan, right? Like, we have some, like, ultra-right candidates pushing psychedelic therapy because it helps like veterans with PTSD. It helps, like, all sorts of things. So we have ufology, we have the psychedelic renaissance, and then we also see the emergence right now, concurrent to these other two things, with like this sort of generic, vaguely new age spirituality.
Mhm.
And I bring up, I think of all of these three strands as being kind of braided together in a way that kind of leverages and legitimizes one another. So, like, while I think there is definitely a stigma associated with the subject, I don't think that stigma has the degree of clout that it historically has, because more and more people, whether they sit in ayahuasca retreat or go through ketamine therapy or do a breathwork retreat or whatever, or they pick up a tarot deck, or like
Yeah.
the point is that there are a lot of much more conventionally accepted ways to understand and contextualize anomalous experiences now that are also much more widely accepted, like popularly. And I think that that has also helped add legitimacy and kind of validation for experiencer phenomena. And I also think it's also helped along by initiatives like the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, which studies spiritual emergence, for them to add UAP and UFO experiences to their kind of criteria of emergent encounters or emergent experiences. So I bring this up because I think of them all as being like intertwined subjects, and all part of like a larger cultural snapback from like super materialistic
Right.
and super materialist versions of sense making and meaning making and reality.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving out of that modern worldview, even
Mhm.
beyond the postmodern worldview into a new paradigm shift, I think is something that's happening. But where do you think that people make I think there's just a gap, at least in my opinion, for me. There was maybe it wasn't a huge gap because I feel like I've come a long way in 2 years, but
Yeah.
there was just this major gap between this, the physicality, the material aspect of a craft, a UFO, and then quickly you get dumped into this topic and you're suddenly in this world of woo and esoteric and the occult and religion. Like it is such a
Yes.
huge shift. Did you guys experience that? Sydney and Curious, did you experience that feeling of like it's a physical reality and then all of a sudden now it's into the paranormal?
Yeah, I know personally. Again, so I didn't start my sightings didn't prompt my research. My research kind of prompted this random sighting, I guess, that kind of fell upon me. And I don't know. I feel like I had an understanding that very much this was a nuts and bolts conversation at the top level, or when it comes to like the government, they're approaching this from like a nuts and bolts funding. They're talking about like, the physical material and I don't know, the puzzle of it all. But as I kind of got acquainted with the community, you did get just more information from experiencers and hearing firsthand experiences of people talking about how it changed their spirituality or morphed their ideas towards religion. It kind of changed my approach to this. I know, my experiences, they have caused like a lot of stress within my life. And so I do have to kind of pull back a bit and kind of reframe how I approach this, approach my experiences and my research as well. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know, there's it's a through line that happens when it comes to talking about the physical and to kind of the like esoteric kind of religious or woo kind of aspect of the phenomenon, but they're definitely tied together and they're all part of the same kind of body. But I think that might be a hard notion to approach as a newcomer to the community,
Right.
is that there are so many branches of this and there are so many different identities that people have towards this reality that it can be really confusing and easy to get lost in. And I think that was the hardest part of my experience. Is I had all these experiences, I've seen craft and they're showing up to me, and then I don't really meditate anymore. They just like show up in the sky like without calling them. I guess it's the hitchhiker effect. And kind of understanding what that means for me and in my life and how I look at the government's approach it's overwhelming. And so typically I just kind of have to step back and take a break. But I've become comfortable in that understanding that I just don't know. And so I'm just taking it day by day. And I think hopefully more people who are learning about the community kind of are able to compartmentalize their ideas towards, if they do want to think about it towards a more nuts and bolts perspective, or think about it scientifically versus emotionally.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think that's how I think that's where the gap is going to be from the, you know, the non-experiencer side, is like, if we want them to understand like this topic and to engage with it more, it's like, how do you really get them there without really going deeper and down the rabbit hole, which, you know, you don't necessarily want to send everyone down that rabbit hole. Do you have any thoughts on that, NikkiStarChild?
Well, I just think it's so great when people come out and they share their experience like you have. And to take those moments, I've had my own experiences, but I feel very close to what Sydney had said, but my experiences are nothing on the level that Sydney was talking about with seeing like a being physically, you know, like I've seen lights in the sky. I've had intense meditations. I've had, you can call them realizations or you can call them messages. And yeah, like a lot of really interesting things along the way. So I've always been open, you know, to that aspect of it. And if I were to gauge from my personal journey, my spiritual journey, yeah, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't have taken my camera out. And I think it was, I want to say 8 years ago, I was doing CE5. It's just weird. I'd be like, let's do CE5 like right now. You know, we'd get in like a mood. Right now, I'm in my backyard. Come on, aliens, right?
Yep.
That's what I was doing. I had the app. I paid for it. Cold hard cash on my debit card or whatever. So then I see something up there, right? And I was like, no way. No way. No way. No way. And I was like, well, I better take a picture. So I went out and I found a way to take a picture. And because I got a picture and I had like the orb experience, right?
Yeah.
I felt like inclined very much to post it on the internet. And so that was my first video actually, like on my channel. And it was it was also a CE5 Stephen Greer World Initiative Day because I follow the Stephen Greer messages. You know, like I got one earlier today. I was like, okay, I see CE5 on. You know, so if I'm in my backyard and I remember it's Stephen World, and I always like, okay, all right, maybe I'll see something else. So that was like once. So they're all connected. You're saying curious creatures, just like you're saying. There's a connection here, and sometimes I think it's a lot scarier than it seems. I think that's what I'm learning the deeper I get into it too. So it's good that we're all out here talking about it.
Very cool. Ariel.
So, can we talk for a minute about synchronicities? I'm curious what you guys have to say about synchronicities. Did synchronicities increase after your experiences? Leah, did synchronicities increase after your spiritual emergence type of experiences? Yeah, just synchronicities, go.
Sydney.
Well, I'm glad you asked because when I became friends with the friend I saw the UFO with, it was the first time in my life that synchronicity started to happen to me. Like, you know, basic things like you're talking about something and then the radio says like a word that is like what you're talking about, you know, and then basic stuff like say, you know, thinking the same thing. But I truly feel like that friend like unlocked that, and maybe it was just our energy together, like we could have those experiences together. But yeah, it was strange. Ever since I met her, I've had those types of things happen, and I don't have an explanation for it other than maybe just like luck. I you know, I'm Irish, so I kind of believe in luck and that kind of thing. And like if you're open to it, then maybe the universe has a sense of humor and wants to humor you and like show you that it's listening to you and stuff like that. Also, Mark Barash, who did the movie The Phenomenon, I was talking to him at the Soul Conference, and he said maybe synchronicities are like us from the future, or like a different timeline that's in the future, like reaching back through reality, you know, to like give us signs. That kind of thing is just cute to me. And either way, I think they're very positive, even though you can get very creeped out sometimes with like repeating numbers. Sometimes it's just too much and you're like, I'm going to block that out. But I think it's fun, you know.
Cool. Leah?
Another favorite subject, right? Yeah, you know, it's I was just talking again, look at I live an intellectually rich life. We were just talking about synchronicities this afternoon. And I think actually where I have found synchronicities to be the strongest in my life have actually been in business. And I say that because I have generally found that when pursuing a successful business venture, more and more synchronicities emerge, right? Like you sit down on a flight and the guy next to you works in investing and he wants to talk, but he has a friend who wants to talk, or these kind of like either coincidences or chains of events that speak to something that does not feel probabilistically neutral, right? Like it feels like uncanny. The other place where I have also deeply associated the synchronicity experience is with experiences of romantic love. And like I'm actually working on a thread about like sort of how that relates to how I met my husband and where synchronicity is factored in. And they were like a very powerful element of meeting him and getting married and building a life together. What I think is what I have always said about synchronicities, or what I've always thought, is that like the world is always talking to us. Like we live in an enchanted world, which can mean any number of things, up to and including that like we are party to conversations going on all around us, but we aren't necessarily able or have not learned how to listen to them. I think of them almost similar to like dowsing, where this is a skill set that can kind of be deliberately cultivated, much in the same way that the creative process can be deliberately cultivated. And this is all to say that I think synchronicities are a very common experience, but that we are so stimulated and burdened by food, sex, drugs, television, social media, etc., that most of us are dissociated from actually hearing it or experiencing them actively. I liken them to like walking through a busy cafe and like hearing conversations at tables all around you. How do you learn how to listen to the conversation that's happening closest to the door versus the one that's happening in the back of the room? And I think through deliberate training. Now, I will also say, I think the synchronicity experience, this is just like Leah theory, maps really heavily to people who also experience aesthetic chill. So like aesthetic chill is like that sense of awe or emotional overwhelm when you encounter works of art, great natural beauty, hearing live music, things like that. Those are like the common experiences that people have that would be characterized as like these expansive states of consciousness. And I think that those experiences share like a very similar vein with like also the experience of asynchronicity, in the sense that I think that people who are able to identify and recognize the presence of synchronicities are also people who are tuned into and able to recognize these kind of awe-inducing experiences or these numinous experiences. And I also think kind of my final comment on this is I genuinely believe that there are people who are unable to experience this. Like, and I say that like having had tons of interviews and tons of conversations, there are lots of people who do not experience that kind of overwhelming emotional experience when encountering art or natural beauty. And I think that in turn, they also likely do not experience or hear or witness synchronicities in the same way that others do. Did I just like kill the mood?
No, not at all.
I totally agree 100%.
No, we're who's going to talk next.
Yeah.
I think synchronicities for me, like, and I think what you're saying, this idea of being overstimulated and all these other things, for me, I think that's why I never saw them, and why maybe after my experience with the phenomenon, you're already like reflective and you're starting to like explore and open up your mind, like what is really going on here. And in the midst of that, then these messages start popping up, right? Because you're now open and you're not overstimulated by all the other distractions because you're so focused on this new experience. I don't know. That was how it felt for me. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I have one more thing I wanted to talk about. Sydney, I think it was you who said like the universe has a sense of humor, right? Like there's this writer Hakeem Bey. He sucks. Like this is not a personal endorsement of who he is. He's a bad guy. But he has this line from his book TAZ where he says the universe wants to play. And I bring this up because despite working in tech, I remain a pretty steadfast critic of the encroachment of technology into our daily lives and sort of its addictive potential and how it disrupts thinking and attention and consciousness. But one of the more pernicious artifacts of technology being a 24/7 experience for us is that it has disrupted organic synchronicities. And a good example of this, for instance, would be like back in my day when I was, younger, if I wanted to buy a book on, say, UFOs, I would go to the bookstore and I would browse the books and I would talk to the people at the bookstore and maybe I'd talk to other patrons there. Come across a book, buy it, bring it home, read it, whatever. That doesn't exist anymore. What exists is going on Amazon. Amazon knows my purchase history for over 20 years. It recommends me books that algorithmically have a high probability of me actually liking and enjoying. And it's a completely algorithmic and synthesized feeling or experience of synchronicity, right? And this is completely separate and distinct from what I would characterize as like organic synchronicity, which is what happens when you actually move out into the world. And I think that like our brains are not good at discerning between organic and synthesized synchronicity, right? Like we may see synchronicities on Twitter or Facebook versus synchronicities like moving about like physically through the world. But I do think that like in addition to just this sense of overstimulation, so much of how we experience the world now is through the lens and interned bias of these like algorithmic recommendation systems that basically make decisions for us all the time about what we see, who we talk to, how we interface with things, what we buy, what we look like, etc.
And just on a side note, I'm convinced that like Twitter and all these things, do you notice that every time you look at a like, it's like 222 or 333? Like you're going to be the next person to make it 222 if you like it. I think part of it is designed to kind of get us to tease us into some of that world, and it's architect or constructed, I guess. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, and kind of to that point, those are the little synchronicities that I've noticed within my life. Is just like checking the time when you have 11:11 or 2:22 or 12:22 or something like that. But I don't pay too much attention to the time ones because I feel like that's just kind of, I don't know, maybe it just aligns with my body's internal clock. I just check the time at 11:11 and something like that. So, but I know another synchronicity that I've noticed is, I guess, during our first sighting when the orb flew over our car, our radio started playing Billie Eilish's song Halley's Comet, and then the song after that was Fallen Star. So that was a kind of funny, like pointed moment, I guess. I mean, the phone was on shuffle, so I don't know, but that felt like a little magical. But yeah, it's a weird thing that does happen. And I know after my first sightings, my sister's like ex-boyfriend who lives back in Virginia, he had his first sighting, and I had a friend who I met through Twitter who had their first UFO sighting. And I think that's less of a synchronicity, but more so maybe like a transference of this kind of opened mind that occurs. I always say kind of believing is seeing when it comes to the phenomenon. So maybe it takes yourself believing that it can exist and manifest that causes these kind of physical manifestations of them. But yeah, I don't know. Synchronicities are very strange and they do occur. And I know after the first time I actually went on like a podcast to talk about my story, directly after I had this owl fly over me. And, I've had a lot of experiences with owls that are like strange. We have owls outside of our house all the time, and we don't really live in an area near a forest. I'm in like rural Texas in a way. So it's been a kind of strange synchronicity and just it feels like a pointed kind of message, I guess, from the phenomenon, but I don't really know how to decipher them. So I just kind of let them be. I just, consume the universe for what it is and just, I don't ponder them too much.
That's funny. On our last live podcast, we had Jared, and he talked about the owl book, you guys remember the name of the guy?
It's The Messengers by Mike Cleland.
Thank you. That's
Yeah, I'm just reading it right now.
Oh yeah, my husband is too. It got my husband fascinated, and he bought the audiobook and he listened to it. And like now everywhere he goes, he sees owls. So it's really kind of funny. But it's interesting. But what he was telling me from what he was reading is that the shape of the eyes, like they're like satellites, right? And so it's potentially they can pick up fields or frequencies or things that we can't. And so potentially they're attracted to a frequency where the UFOs or UAPs may be. And so that's why they appeared frequently around sightings. And it's like Eric said, there's story after story after story. You just can't like ignore it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and during times when we would sit outside, and we weren't usually meditating because after a period of time we stopped meditating. They would just show up whenever we were spending a period of time outside. But we would always have massive birds fly over us, and that's when we knew, okay, we're about to see something. And I think birds have that unique like sensor of, I don't know if it's like they're able to feel like interdimensional happenings or something like that, but there's obviously they're very in tune with nature in a way that we can't maybe totally perceive. So I've definitely I look at birds differently, if that makes sense. Like, looking at crows and like listening to them and paying attention to animals around me because they're tuned in. So
yeah, that's something, Sydney. I don't know if you've experienced that as well. Like really just this tuning into nature I think my dogs are going to bark, so I'll blank it out if they do. But tuning into nature, tuning into that has been like something that really took over my life in the last couple of years. Is that something that's changed for you by any chance?
I, like this last summer, I interned at a psychedelic church in Oakland, and, being in that community with all it entails did connect me to nature. So I will point to that as maybe the prime thing that did. Honestly, the concept that non-human intelligences might like be here and some of them might be bad. It all like loops into kind of like, I just feel very protective over our planet. But honestly, sometimes I do feel a little bit like alienated from reality from my experiences with, the UFO side of things. So I don't know. I feel like I more got that from like psychedelic reality and community. And the UFO aspect, it's almost like alienates me from the earth and I have to like reground, almost. Oh, Krys, you're muted.
Again. So Sydney, I was going to say, do you want to share more about your project that you're working on? Is that something you want to talk about or not right now?
Oh, yeah. So I am working on a startup that is trying to start a religiously oriented psilocybin service center in the state of Oregon, working with some great fellow Yale students on that. So that's definitely a love of mine, because to me, psychedelics help you conceptualize all of reality from the negative to the positive. It can show you all that there really is in a way that kind of almost is like a boot camp for dealing with very difficult problems in reality. So very much passionate about that and working on that right now.
It's really cool.
Sydney, you and I should talk.
Yeah, totally.
I say this as someone not only personally interested, but like this is an area where I do like pro bono consulting.
Oh, fabulous.
And I'd love to hear about this. Yeah, super cool and critically important, right? Like we're living in a time of enormous trauma, both individually and broadly. And psychedelics are a way to basically scale up healing in a way that talk therapy and SSRIs or conventional interventions don't allow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting. And that's how I was introduced to her, through the Future Folklore and the project she's doing. So it's really, I cannot wait to see where that goes and how that takes off and like what it provides for society. I mean, there's such a huge need, in my opinion.
Thank you. I agree.
So do you think then psychedelics are kind of like the next, like in 10 years, that'll be the norm as opposed to SSRIs?
I would hope that both routes, traditional medication and shamanic medication, for lack of a better word, are, approached at the same playing field.
Okay.
And the fear needs to go away. Every culture had lineages that dealt with psychedelics. So people don't need to think of it as a foreign or, druggy thing. It was sacred to every culture at some point. So I really hope that we can get over the stigma. And I because right now it's so bad. Like I saw a presentation recently that said that, like a huge majority of people in America say that LSD is more harmful than cigarettes. And so there's so much misinformation out there that really did a lot of damage. And I just feel like Leah said, you can unlock so many aspects of your personality that you would never be able to unlock with like traditional talk therapy. Because that's really what, living well is about. It's like discovering your best self and how you want to be happy, which is unique to every single person. And psychedelics do offer a very unique point. They interface you with the spiritual or, I don't know, like the grand information center of the universe that exists in your own mind if you're more of an atheist. But it's an extremely personal experience, and I think that's exactly what we need in the current world.
Go girl. She's like got her speech down. I like it.
Wow.
Good job. That's exciting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering kind of that we're on this conversation or topic. I was wondering for the experiences in the chat, what are some maybe coping mechanisms that you've adopted to deal with your experiences? I know, Sydney, you talked about that idea or notion of like feeling isolated through this, and I can really relate to that. That's why I've connected with experiencers and kind of that's why I feel the need to reach out on Twitter for sure and just hear other people's opinions and what are your kind of coping mechanisms with dealing with the negative aspect? Because there definitely is one in fear and you have to take breaks. But yeah, I'd love to hear more.
So I just put that question in my chat. What kind of coping methods do you use if you're an experiencer? And I've pinned it to the top of the chat. So anybody in the chat, feel free to put, and I'll star them. And when we get a calm moment, I'll bring those up because that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was reaching out, which it's kind of scary when you think about it, reaching out to UFO Twitter, because like I had no idea who I was going to encounter here and like what kind of cult I might get involved in, and but I didn't have anywhere. I literally didn't know where else to go. It's like, and I was already on Twitter because I was like really into politics years ago, and I just had an account, so I just got on Twitter and started searching, and that was one of my coping mechanisms, which is really insane. I didn't have at the time. My family has always been supportive, but not like fully engaged in, even though they've been there they've seen the same things I've seen. They've just checked on a different level, checked out, so it's really lonely for a couple of years, or for like at least a year. I would say I was very isolated and felt like I was just on my own journey, which I don't think was bad. I think that's part of it. I was on my own journey. I was finding myself. I was trying to understand myself. I did share with I'm a veteran and I'm a disabled vet. So I did share with my psychiatrist at one of my visits. And honestly, the response was not terrible. They were but it wasn't helpful. It was kind of like, oh, well, why would you go through ontological shock just because you saw a UFO? It's like, hello. I mean, like, have you unpacked that whole concept of the fact that there's non-human intelligences and there's, like that. So it wasn't helpful, but it wasn't stigmatizing either. I felt kind of relieved that I got it out. But other than that, there's no support system that I'm aware of that has really been there. What about you guys?
No, zero. No, you guys. Some people, some close friends, but yeah, the community helps. I'm so glad that you guys are reaching out to the community, being part of the community, interacting with the community. It can be real, really help with some of that stuff.
It could be just as bad. Look what Leah went through. Look,
it can backfire.
It can be really toxic here too.
Yeah.
So it's really it's a toss up of what you're going to encounter.
Especially when it comes to like posting videos. I know, Krys, you've been really scared to post videos because of the backlash you might receive.
Yeah. It's weird because early on, I was just like, when I first came out, it was kind of like you, Nikki. I was just like, I'm going to post it. Like, cause I knew for me, it was real. I knew what I was seeing, I knew I had already unpacked a lot of things, but, at this point, because I guess maybe there's some comfort in repeatability for me. I think if it was like one time only or whatever, but because I've had so many different sightings, I have a little bit of comfort. Like there's some reliability in my story. So in the end, what do I care whether people believe me or not? It is my experience. And it's more for me to share for other people to, if they are experiencing something similar, to have the freedom to like explore that, because I want people to have a safe place to land, when they're experiencing something like this. That's one of the reasons we're here. So anyways, I appreciate you guys sharing. Wow, this has been a fantastic panel and amazing thoughts. Leah, your intellectual capacities, we need more of it. I mean, all of you guys are amazing, but I just love listening to you and how you unpack things, because it really helps me integrate those thoughts into practicality. So thank you for that. And Sydney, wow, I know you're not a UFO Twitter gal. You've avoided Twitter for the most part, so we brought you into the fold quick and hard. But thank you for sharing with us, and I hope that as you continue to explore this topic and develop your passions, and keep us updated on your treatment clinic. I think that's amazing work, and your films as you graduate. That's awesome. And if you and Curious connect, because I know she's interested in the academic side of things, so I think that's another great connection for you guys to stay connected. And thank you for joining us, Curious. I appreciate it. Your story's so cool. I just resonate with it so much. It just I don't know why there's a sense of comfort when you have somebody else who's had a shared experience, so it's kind of neat. And thank you, NikkiStarChild, for the amazing moderation and keeping us on track and keeping us flowing on the track. You're amazing at that. And if you guys don't watch her, she's on every morning, Monday through Friday at 5, 4.
Yeah, something like that.
Every morning.
We'll talk about that. This looks so good. This looked so opposite of everything I do every day. It was amazing. No, but thank you so much for organizing everything. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Everybody sharing, taking the time out of your day and your life to come and share. And thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat. I think I saw we're at up to 70 people live, which is a great stream. So thanks to everybody who came. And I'm just really happy it turned out. Great stream, great ladies, and couldn't have asked for anything better.
Let's continue this conversation. I mean, let's continue to band together. Let's continue to collaborate. Let's continue to have these conversations, because I just feel like if we could help one person, or if we can pique one person's interest, to me, that's so worth it. And then that one person goes out and affects another person.
Yes.
And that is how we are going to reach people. It's just one person at a time. So let's keep this up. Let's not have this be a one-time thing. And, my DMs are always open to any of you. This has been so much fun.
It's been awesome. Thank you guys. Wow. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Ariel. I didn't wrap up. She's my amazing co-host. I'm just so happy that we have the opportunity to work together. You guys don't know how blessed I feel. And
I'm the blessed one. I'm the blessed one.
No, we can just go on about each other. But I appreciate that. It's so comforting to know you have somebody like that to rely on when you're doing something as public as this with your story. So thank you so much, you guys. It was great. Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
So nice to meet you guys.
Afterwards, it might need to upload something a little bit. If you'll just let it do that. It's live, so there shouldn't be anything else. But see you guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, guys.